Hello, 5th and 6th graders. We are here to do chapters 2 and 3 of Judy Blume's Blubber. If you remember, when we read chapter 1, we met our narrator, Jill. She's a 5th grader. Some of her classmates are a girl named Wendy, who, we'll just put it in a nutshell, she's not very nice. She likes to pick on people. She likes to start stuff, as you guys say. Another girl in her class is a girl named Donna, who has a major thing about horses. Everything for Donna is all about horses. And a girl named Linda. Linda is a heavier set girl who does a report on whales. And she talks about things like the blubber that's on a whale, that layer of fat that keeps a whale warm. Of course, Wendy has to make that her nickname and be really cruel and start calling her that because Linda is a little bit heavy. The other person that we meet that's important is Tracy. Tracy is Jill's best friend who lives near her but is in a different classroom. So when we left our girls, they were in their 5th grade classes. All of Jill's class had to give a report on a mammal. Jill did lions, Donna, of course, did horses, Linda did the whale. By the time it was over, Wendy had everybody all up in arms and giggling and laughing and was calling Linda Blubber. On the bus right on the way home, they were giving her a rough time. And, you know, it makes sense that Linda was starting to get a little bit upset by all of it. So, because this book takes place in the 1970s, you'll notice that there are certain things that they talk about that don't always necessarily like match up to what 5th graders would do today. We talked about this a little bit in chapter 1. There's no cell phones, no computers, no video games, things like that. What the girls will do in this chapter is they'll start talking about stamp collecting, which I suspect most of you would be like, that is the most boring hobby in the world. But back in the 70s, it was very interesting because, again, no internet. We had no way of finding out about the world around us unless we could either go there or get information from there. And so people would look for like pen pals and other people to write them and give them information about what their lives were like. And that had to be done on paper. They had to actually put it in an envelope and mail it. And a lot of people thought that what might be fun after that was you collect the stamps because the stamps are different in every country. If you go to England, the stamps usually have a picture of the Queen on them. We don't have a Queen. We have all kinds of weird stamps. Most commonly back in the 70s, you saw George Washington, our first president, on them. But different countries did all kinds of different things. So people would collect the different stamps, both locally, like from the US, and also from different parts of the world, and also from different time periods. Stamps can be very valuable. Not just the money that we, the 52 cents or whatever it is today to send the letter somewhere. There are stamps that, because they're so rare, because, usually we throw the envelope out, throw the stamp out, it's done, it's been used. Some of them are rare, and then people want to collect them. And they would put them in little, like, kind of like a photo album. But you didn't want to actually glue anything because you didn't want to ruin the stamp. And the kids would mail away for like a bunch of stamps, like random stamps, kind of like buying a pack of Pokemon cards. You might get a couple of great things in there. You might get some absolutely garbage cards. You might get cards you've already got. And that's when you start trading with your friends. And they would do the same thing with stamps. They would get these envelopes of stamps in that another company had collected, and then trade with their friends for ones that they didn't have or ones that were more valuable. So when the girls start talking about pulling out their stamp stuff, that's what they're talking about. When she talks about going to Gimbel's to get stamps, that's because in certain stores they actually had a case with expensive and rare and interesting stamps that kids could go and buy and put into their collections. So that's what they talk about. I think it's the beginning of chapter 3 when she goes over to Tracy's house and they're putting the stamps, and they're talking about their stamp collections. It's not something I know of anybody who does anymore, but it was pretty popular back in the day. So just like last time, I will stop and read the questions to you when we get to them. And here we go. All right. Table of contents. So the chapters we're reading today are Chapter 2, That's What You're Gonna Be for Halloween, and Chapter 3. And now for the most original costume of the day. One of the questions will ask you to go back and look at a particular page. If you're looking at my screen, you can see the page numbers are written at the bottom down here. So when I ask you to go back and check for that, just scroll through the video until you get back to that page and find that conversation. And here we go. Chapter 2. That's what you're going to be for Halloween? Linda lives in Hidden Valley. So do Wendy, Carolyn, Robbie, and a bunch of other kids. It's a big group of houses with a low brick wall around it and a sign that says, "Welcome to Hidden Valley. Speed limit 25 miles per hour." Across the street, there's another sign saying, "Watch our children." It's called Hidden Valley because there are a million trees, and in the summer, you can't see any of the houses. Nobody told me this. It's something I figured out by myself. My stop is next. Me and Tracy are the only ones who get off there. The Wu family lives across the road from us. They have a lot of animals. All of this doesn't mean we live in the country. It's kind of pretend country. That is, it looks like country because of all the woods, but just about everyone who lives here works in the city, like my mother and father. I don't know one single farmer, unless you count the woman who sells us vegetables in the summer. Can you come over? Tracy asked as we collected the mail from our mailboxes. As soon as I change, I told her. Bring your stamps, Tracy said. I will. Me and Tracy are practically professional stamp collectors. We both have the Master Global album, and I have this deal going with my father. If I let my nails grow between now and Christmas, he will give me $25 to spend in Gimbals, which has the best stamp department in the whole world. So even though it's just about killing me, I'm not going to bite my nails. Sometimes I have to sit on my fingers to keep from doing it. When I got home, Kenny was waiting at the front door. He was holding his Guinness Book of World Records in one hand, and with the other hand was shoving a cupcake in his mouth. Did you know the oldest woman to ever give birth to a baby was 57 years old? As he talked, he blew crumbs out of his mouth. So, I said to show I wasn't interested, because if Kenny gets the idea I'm interested, he will tell me facts from his Book of World Records all day. So, that means Grandma's too old to have a baby. Well, of course she is. She's past 60. And Mrs. Sandmeyer's too old, too. Mrs. Sandmeyer is our housekeeper. She takes care of me and Kenny after school. Too old for what? She asked as we walked into the kitchen. Too old to have a baby, Kenny said. Mrs. Sandmeyer laughed. Who says so? My Book of World Records, Kenny told her. The oldest woman to give birth was 57 and you're 58. Don't remind me, Mrs. Sandmeyer said. Mrs. Sandmeyer's always telling us she's getting old, but she can still take on Kenny and his friends at basketball and beat them single-handed. How was your day, Jill? Mrs. Sandmeyer asked me in French as she poured a glass of milk. I answered in English. Pretty good. Mrs. Sandmeyer made a face. Part of her job is to teach me and Kenny to speak French. She's from Switzerland and can speak 3 languages. I understand what she says when she speaks French, but I always answer in English because most of the time I'm too busy to think of the right words in French. After my snack, I changed into my favorite jeans, collected my stamp equipment, and headed for Tracy's. Kenny and Mrs. Sandmeyer were already outside practicing layups. Be back at 5:30, Mrs. Sandmeyer called as I walked up the driveway. I will. Our street isn't big enough to have a name. There's just a sign saying, Private Road, and our house. And Tracy's. Dr. Wu is outside planting tulip bulbs. Tuesday is his day off. Hi, Dr. Wu, I said. He is our family doctor and makes house calls only to us. I like him a lot. He's always smiling. Also, He doesn't gag me with a stick when he looks down my throat. Hi yourself, he called to me. Tracy was in the backyard feeding her chickens. She has 10 of them and a beautiful white rooster called Friendly, who I love. Sometimes Tracy lets me hold him. His crown is red and it feels like a cat's tongue. I know this because last year one of Tracy's cats licked me. She has 7 cats, but they don't live in the house. They come into the garage to get food and water, and the rest of the time they stay outside. Tracy also has 2 dogs. They live in the house. When the chickens were fed, we went inside to Tracy's room to look over our latest approvals from the Winthrop Stamp Company. We decided we'd each buy 2 stamps. Tracy showed me the Halloween costume her mother is making for her. Big Bird from Sesame Street. It has yellow feathers and everything. It's beautiful, I said. I still didn't have an idea for my costume. We went to work on our albums, trading doubles and fastening loose stamps to the page. And then, right in the middle of licking a stamp hinge, I thought up a costume so clever, I didn't even tell Tracy. I decided it would be a surprise. That night, when my mother and father got home, they brought 2 big pumpkins with them. I waited until we were halfway through with dinner before I brought up the subject of my Halloween costume. I don't think I want to be a witch this year, I said. I hoped I wouldn't hurt Mom's feelings because the witch's costume was hers when she was a kid. It has funny pointed-toed shoes with silver buckles, a high black silk hat, and a long black robe with a bow at the neck. The whole thing smells like mothballs. Besides, the shoes hurt my feet. You can be whatever you want, my mother said, and she didn't sound insulted. If she doesn't want to wear the witch's suit, can I? Kenny asked. A boy witch? I said. Sure, what's wrong with that? Nothing, Mom told him. I'd love to have you wear my costume. And I'm going to carry a broom, Kenny said. And I remember that fake cigar from my last year's disguise. I'm going to use that too. I bet there aren't many witches around who smoke cigars. Smoking is dangerous to your health, I said. My cigar's fake, stupid. I gave him a kick under the table and was pleased to see that Mom ground out the cigarette she'd been smoking. What about you, Jill? My father asked. What do you want to be? Oh, I've been thinking I might like to be a flenser. What's that? Kenny asked. You mean you don't know? I said. Never heard of it. With all your facts in the Book of World Records, you never learned about the oldest flenser and the youngest flenser and the flenser who did the best job and all that? Dad, Kenny said. She's starting in again. I absolutely love to tease Kenny. Jill, that's enough, my father said. Tell Kenny what a flenser is. Yes, Mom said. I can hardly wait to hear myself. You mean you don't know either? I asked my mother. Never heard the word. Did you, Gordon? Nope, Dad said. Kenny jumped up. I'll be right back, he told us as he ran out of the room. I knew where he was going, to look up flenser in his dictionary. In a few minutes, he was back carrying it. A flenser strips the blubber off whales, he read, looking at me. That's what you're going to be for Halloween? He asked like he couldn't believe it. I smiled. Where did you get that idea, Jill? Mom asked. From this girl in my class. She gave a report on whales. Well, that's certainly original, Dad said. What kind of costume does a flenser wear? Kenny asked. A flenser suit, I told him. Yeah, but what's it made of? Oh, jeans and a shirt and a special kind of hat and a long knife. No knife, my father said. That's too dangerous. Not a real knife, I said. One made out of cardboard. What kind of hat? Kenny asked. A Flenser hat, naturally, I told him. Yeah, but what's it look like? I can't begin to describe it. You'll just have to wait and see. I'd wear boots if I was a Flenser, Kenny said. What for? I asked him. Because of walking around in all that yucky blubber stuff. Kenny was right. I'd have to wear boots, too. After dinner, we went into the living room for our family poker game. I handed out the Monopoly money. We each get $150 from the bank. My father shuffled the cards. Mom cut them, and Kenny dealt. I got a pair of kings and 3 junk cards. I'm careful not to give away my hand by the expression on my face. You can always tell what Kenny's holding. If it's something good, he makes all kinds of noises and laughs a lot. Even if he doesn't have anything good, he stays in and takes 3 new cards. He never drops out when he should because he can't stand not betting against the rest of us. When it comes to bluffing, my father is the best. Every time he stays in and starts raising, I think he has 3 aces, and unless I have something really great, I drop out. Then I'll find out Dad didn't even have a pair. My mother is not an experienced poker player. She can never remember which is higher, a flush or a straight. Sometimes I have to help her out. Later, when me and Kenny were in our pajamas and ready for bed, my father said we could carve our pumpkins. Mom had to go to her room because the smell of pumpkin guts makes her sick to her stomach. Last year, when I cut out my pumpkin's face, it was all lopsided. But this time I got both eyes even and the nose in between. Dad made the teeth for me. Kenny wouldn't let anyone touch his pumpkin, which is why it turned out looking like it had 3 eyes and no teeth. Question 1 for this lesson. What does Jill plan to be for Halloween? A witch, B, a chicken, C, a flenser, or D, Big Bird? Chapter 3. And now for the most original costume of the day. The next night, I turned my mother's old beach hat into part of my flenser suit. Mom didn't mind because she'd worn the hat for 4 years and was getting tired of it. My mother never sets foot on the beach without wearing a floppy hat. She thinks it's very bad to get sun on her face. She's always saying that sun makes wrinkles and wrinkles make people look older and that someday I will know what she means. My father doesn't worry about wrinkles, so he never has to wear anything on his head. I'll be like him when I grow up. How can you dive under the waves with a floppy hat on your head? I look much older in the beach hat. I could pass for 12. I think maybe even 13, with sunglasses. The beach hat is so big it covers most of my face. It used to be lots of different colors, but now it's faded into kind of a bluish gray. I tried to find pictures of whales to decorate the hat, but I couldn't, so I settled for some dolphins instead. I cut them out and stapled them all over the brim. Then I cut a piece of black construction paper into thin strips and attached them too. They hung down the sides, kind of like hair. I shaped my flenser knife like a sword, but with a big curl at one end. I covered it with gold sparkle and painted my boots to match. Then I tried on my whole costume. I went to my mother's room to have a look in her long mirror, but Kenny was already there admiring himself in the witch's suit. He had on his yellow goggles, and the fake cigar dangled out of the corner of his mouth. And he was doing some strange dance, but as soon as he saw me, he stopped. I just wanted to see if it fit okay, he said. He walked away from the mirror, tripping over the pointy witch's shoes. It's hard to walk in these things, he told me, kicking them off. Can I ask you a very simple question? I asked. Go ahead. Why are you wearing your goggles? If you have to ask, you wouldn't understand, Kenny told me. But speaking of goggles, did you know that the first motorcycle race was in France in 1897? No, I didn't, but thanks for telling me. Kenny looked me up and down. Is that what you're wearing tomorrow? Yes, it's my Flenser suit. I stood in front of the mirror and held the sword out. What did you do to your boots? Painted them. Gold? Why not? Does Mom know? They're my boots, Kenny. Why should Mom care if I had to paint them to match my sword? Speaking of swords, Kenny began. We were not speaking of swords, I told him. We were speaking about my Flenser suit. Yeah, well, if I were you, I'd wear a sign telling people what you are because I don't think anybody's gonna know otherwise. Oh, Kenny, you are so dumb. Of course they'll know. Just look at my hat. Can't you see all the pictures of whales up there? They're dolphins, Kenny said. Only you would know that. And speaking of dolphins, Kenny said, never mind, never mind. I don't want to hear it. Later, I made a sign saying Flenser just in case Kenny was right. I punched 2 holes through it and ran a string across and hung it around my neck. The next morning, my mother was surprised when she saw my boots. They're gold, Mom said in a very loud voice. She puffed hard on her cigarette. Smoking causes cancer and heart disease, I told her, ignoring my boots. Mom mashed her cigarette out and reached for her coffee. What did you do to your new boots, Jill? I painted them. Jill, they have to last you all winter. You haven't even worn them yet. I know it, Mother. Well, how could you do such a thing? A Flenser wouldn't wear plain brown boots. I just hope you used washable paint. I think I did. You checked first, didn't you? I'm almost sure it's washable. You didn't check before you used it? Not exactly. Mom lit another cigarette. I called for Tracy. She was in her Big Bird costume and her mother was adjusting a crown of feathers on her head. How do you like it? She asked, twirling around. Oh, Tracy, you look fantastic. Next to her, I felt very plain. Tracy looked me over. What's a Flenser? She asked, reading my sign. That's what I'm supposed to be, I told her. I know, but what is one? Oh, a Flenser's a guy who strips the blubber off whales. Where'd you get such a weird idea? Tracy asked. From Linda Fisher. You know, the one Wendy calls Blubber. She gave a report on whales. Well, Tracy said, at least you don't have to worry that everyone will be dressed like you. Question number 2. Why did Jill have to explain her costume to Tracy? A. Tracy's in a different class and didn't hear Linda's report. B. Jill did a really bad job on her costume and Tracy couldn't figure out what she was supposed to be. C. Jill needed to practice explaining her costume for the judges in the contest. Or D. Wendy made her do it. She went to the mirror and combed her hair. She has the nicest hair I've ever seen. It hangs straight down her back. She can even sit on it, and it never looks dirty or has tangles. I'm growing mine, but no matter how long it gets, it will never look like Tracy's. Mrs. Wu drove us to school so Tracy wouldn't mess up her costume. When I got to my class, Wendy was already there. She was dressed like a queen. She wore a very high crown with lots of fake emeralds and rubies pasted to it. She also wore her mother's long bathrobe and had this crazy looking fur thing wrapped around her neck. It had eyes, paws, a tail, and everything. Number 3. How is Wendy dressing as a queen symbolic? A. She's related to the Queen of England. B. She wants to be a real queen when she grows up. C. The queen costume is her mom's. Or D. She acts like people should treat her like a queen. Animals are for loving, not wearing, I told her. I know it, Wendy said, but this thing is very old. It belonged to my grandmother. And in those days, They didn't know about ecology. Oh, I said. Then I guess it's all right. Donna Davidson really fooled me. Instead of dressing up like a horse, this year she was a jockey. My things are all genuine, she bragged. My father knows this jockey who's very famous, and he's just my size. And these are his real life jockey clothes. On page 33, Donna says, all of my things are genuine. In this context, what does the word genuine mean? A, kind and nice. B, the real items, not toys or fakes. C, expensive. Or D, they belong to a horse named Genuine. Donna looked pretty good, but I didn't tell her I thought so. And I wasn't worried about winning the prize for the most original costume because a flenser is a lot more clever than a jockey or a queen with a tall crown. Practically everyone else in our class was dressed like a bum, with old baggy pants and shirts hanging out and charcoal smudges on their faces. Carolyn even carried a stick with a pouch tied on one end. There's nothing very original about dressing up like that. Right after Miss Minish took the attendance, she told us to line up for the Halloween assembly. Remember, no talking in the halls or the auditorium. I stood on line between Wendy and Linda, who was wearing a long red cape. And as we walked down the hall, Linda tapped me and said, "What are you supposed to be?" "Can't you read?" I asked, holding up my sign. "Oh, a flenser. I bet you got that idea from my report." "What makes you think so?" "Jill Brenner," Miss Minish snapped. "I said no talking." In the auditorium, our class sat in the third and fourth rows. I whispered to Linda, "What are you supposed to be?" "Never mind." "Don't you know?" "I know." "Then tell me." "No, it's my own business." "I'll bet you're supposed to be Little Red Riding Hood." "I am not." I turned to Wendy. "Get a load of Little Red Riding Hood," I said. Wendy leaned across me and told Linda, "You better watch out for the big bad wolf." "Yeah," I said, "you better." I felt a hand on my head. I turned around in my seat. It was Miss Minish. "If I have to speak to you again, you'll go back to the classroom." I didn't say a word during the Pledge of Allegiance or the Star-Spangled Banner. Linda sang in a very loud voice, and when I looked at her, I could see her gray tooth. Wendy said if she isn't more careful about the way she brushes, all her teeth will turn gray and rotten and fall out. The Halloween parade was next. Every class had a turn to march across the stage. The costume judges all sat in the first row. They were mothers from the PTA. It's against the rules for them to vote for their own kids. I watched carefully as the other classes had their turns. I pretended to be a judge. Only two sixth graders were dressed as anything besides bums. Jerry Pochuk was a doctor, and Fred Yarmouth was something I couldn't figure out. I certainly didn't see any costumes as original as mine, or that were prettier than Tracy's. After the parade, Mrs. Runyon, the librarian, stood on the stage and said, "I'm happy to be here today to present the prizes for the most beautiful and the most original costumes." I sat on my hands to keep from chewing my nails. But before I do, I want to share with you the fine prizes the PTA has selected and donated. Mrs. Runyon held up two paperback books. They both had medals printed on the covers. I read them last year. One wasn't too bad, but the other was so boring I never got past the first chapter. Still, it wasn't the prize that mattered. It was the idea of winning. "And now, for our winner," Mrs. Runyon said, "for the most beautiful contest, Tracy Woo, the Big Bird." Everyone clapped as Tracy ran to the stage, dripping yellow feathers all over the aisle. She got the boring book. "And now, for the most original costume of the day." I sat up in my seat. To Fred Yarmouth, the fried egg, Mrs. Runyon called. I couldn't believe it. I was so sure the prize would be mine. And how did the judges know Fred was supposed to be a fried egg when I had no idea what he was? Fred ran to the stage. Mrs. Runyon said, Tell us, Fred, how did you decide to be a fried egg? Oh, I don't know, Fred said. I had this white sheet and some yellow felt, and when I put it together, that's what it looked like to me. He hadn't even planned to be an egg. That made everything worse. Now I'd be stuck wearing gold boots for the rest of the year, and all for nothing. Number 5. Why is Jill disappointed at the end of chapter 3? A. She wanted to be an egg. B. She thought her costume was more creative. C. She was jealous of Tracy. Or D. She thought Wendy would tease her for losing. Question 6. This is a long answer. Feel free to either record yourself giving me the answer or use the Google speech to text, that little purple puzzle piece, in a Google Doc and submit your answer that way. Number 6. If we are still social distancing this Halloween, what are some changes we might have to make to our traditional ways of celebrating the holiday? Please give me at least 3 or 4 good sentences that 5th or 6th graders would write that show me you gave this a little bit of thought. All right, that's the end of chapter 3. Please go back and read the questions. Go over to the Google Doc and fill them in for me. Make sure it goes through so that I can make sure that I see that you've done the work and I don't come bothering you for something you've already done. Have a great day.